So I think what we're considering now, and we're looking at the same thing you are, how do we get people to understand why we pay more for food and then they have to pay more? Mm-hmm. Because we keep talking about the dollar. And I remember at the beginning of the organic movement, it was like, okay, I'm going to put $1 on the table. You tell me how much of that is going to actually go to the people. And everybody would just sit there. Because it would get down to 5 cents. It was all gone. And I think now, if we can possibly get justice for paying people for taking care of the right kind of food, if we can begin elevating that all the way from people who are impoverished, that if somehow we can help those people to get the right kind of food, it cannot be elitist, you're right. Other parts of the world, they don't do this to people who don't have enough money.
Welcome to the Real Organic Podcast. I'm Lindley Dixon, co-director of the Real Organic Project. We're a grassroots, farmer-led movement with an add-on organic food label to distinguish organic crops grown in healthy soils and organic livestock raised on well-managed pasture. You just heard from Ziff Cool, the owner of Flea Street Cafe in the San Francisco Bay Area, which this year celebrated its 40th year in business. In 1976, Ziff opened late for the train, which just may have been the first organic restaurant in the country. Ziff is a lecturer for Stanford's Department of Education, and she uses her home garden and kitchen as a model classroom, inspiring Masters of Education students to develop curricula that takes children from the garden into the kitchen with just one pot and no recipes. Her backyard garden is where I had the privilege of being a guest and having this conversation. Welcome to the Real Organic Podcast, Ziff. I'm here with Ziff Cool in your backyard. So you're the owner of Flea Street. Will you tell us a little bit about that cafe and how it all got started?
So Flea Street has its 42nd birthday or anniversary this August. And it was a second restaurant. The first restaurant started in 1976. It was called Late for the Train. And according to some people, it was one of the first organic restaurants in the country, because back then, though, using the word organic was nearly impossible because people didn't want to hear it. We were very committed to using what are now called clean ingredients. I was taught that you don't poison your family, your community, your workers by my mother and father, because I was brought up in an ethnic background where we knew where our food came from and there were no pesticides or chemicals. It was very natural to me. So when I moved from this small western Pennsylvania town to California, meeting someone hitchhiking and ended up in the food industry.
That's such a classic hippie story.
Yeah. Oh, it was a '67 Volkswagen van too that I came in. But when I got here and ended up in the restaurant business with Bob Cool, who eventually became my husband, I was committed to those standards or those ethics of food and people. And even though it wasn't fashionable then, or it was very misunderstood because it was crunchy granola, carob, health food, it wasn't understood that every ingredient can be organic. So when we opened Late for the Train, all the food it was by the train station. So we wanted to make everybody late, just come on in and eat. It was a breakfast and lunch place that was real food. I mean, it was an incredible turkey sandwich, or it was, all the vegetables we knew where they came from because we had a produce company, 2 women who went to the produce market and got us organic vegetables. Or that's how I met many of my farmer heroes and friends, like Full Belly Farms and Coke Farms and Wiley. Many of these people I knew met in the late 70s or 80s because I was looking for real food in this community. And Flea Street was the second restaurant because my former husband, Bob Cool, did not think we were real restaurateurs because we were just offering breakfast and lunch, which for me, quite honestly, was just fine because I had child and was trying to make a lifestyle. It was a lot.
I have always thought that the only business maybe worse than farming in terms of exhaustion is the restaurant business.
I think we're hand in hand, and being close to the farming community and learning so much about food, because that's really where I learned. I didn't learn, I mean, I used classic cookbooks like The Joy of Cooking to learn basic, the science of food, but I didn't go to culinary school, and I was an organic person. And I was a woman organic person, which meant, quite honestly, when I look back in my career, putting all those things into the hopper along with being female, I allowed myself to be disrespected and bullied and not treated right.
You probably didn't have a choice.
I didn't, but now as an elder, when I think about it, I think I should have just fired them or done something stronger, but there was not a lot of support. But the whole organic, the natural food, the mama cooking, the papa cooking, the stories of food, the connections, the flavor coming first, the keep it simple was so not stylish. We didn't have the word sustainable, we didn't have anything but organic. That was the only word. And that one we couldn't even put on the menu.
You heard farmers describe that organic to them is so much more than just no pesticides, even though that's an amazing gift of organic. Was that awareness with you as well?
Yes, I learned from going to EcoFarm. I didn't go to any of the typical conferences that most people did. IACP, I could name them all. They were food organizations. I didn't join the James Beard Foundation, but I became deeply connected and I would say a little obsessed with the farming community. Went to EcoFarm for over 30 years, was on the board for a while, because I felt, and I kept trying to bring other cooks in, and I think more cooks now go, but like, oh my God, this is the place to learn about soil. This is to learn about why our food tastes better. This is to learn where irregularity in the sizes and colors doesn't matter. Because what we're doing is we are, as cooks, and I like that word better than chefs, and restaurant owners, we are a really important part of messaging the kind of food that the people who grow our food are connected to keep the environment safe, to keep people safe. There was nothing to prove it back then, remember. There was no science then, and people they thought we were lunatic fringe. That's the word I heard a lot, lunatic fringe.
And so Drew said they called it voodoo agriculture, organic back then.
Okay, well, I was called lunatic fringe, so she was called voodoo agriculture. But in the restaurant business, it was even, I mean, you all had something going because you were next to soil and you were proving it, and you knew how to evolve the growing of food for safety for everyone. I actually call you the most important environmental pioneers. Pioneers is a weird word because actually you weren't pioneers because they used to do this in the old country. None of us are pioneers. We were all just old world people that way back then couldn't prove it, but now have proven that we were right. We were absolutely right doing what we were.
And all these people are late to the party and trying to get a little piece of that money that's coming in. So you held this event last night of farmers. You want to describe a little bit about who was there and what we were talking about, and if any of these issues have been here all along for you, if it felt new?
So Paul and Drew, who I've known for nearly 40 years, because I used to drive an old truck up to the farmer's market, and it was illegal for me to buy food wholesale at the farmer's market. They wouldn't let me in after 8 o'clock when they rang the bell. It was the first farmer's market around here. It was Palo Alto. So I had to get in there before 8 o'clock and get all my cases of food once a week.
Did you pre-order? Is that why you had to come in early?
Yes, and that was another challenge.
As a cook, not a chef?
That was another challenge, which I think still exists, is that our timing is very different. We're up late at night, you're up very early in the morning. But so Paul and Drew approached me about both EcoFarm and about the, I keep forgetting, I want to call it Food First.
The Real Organic Project.
About the Real Organic Project. And for me, it just made sense, because I remember the days at EcoFarm when suddenly Whole Foods and Driscoll's and all these big guys were showing up, and we thought that was really exciting. Like, oh my God, this is so cool. They're going to change the world in a big way. Fast forward, though they certainly are the big guys putting food into organic production, what Paul and Drew explained to me was they needed to start this new movement with the Real Food Project and that and other organizations that could take the message to people in the midst of utter confusion about what organics are all about anymore, and that this was once again a somewhat grassroots effort of doing kind of the same thing we were trying to do way back then. But I think, as Dave said, there are some differences now because media is different and there's more money now. I mean, there are lots of changes, but in a way, the meeting last night, which we called a salon, and that name came to me from a very dear friend of mine, Wendy Schmidt of the Schmidt Family Foundation, 11th Hour. She was the one who said, Jesse, let's pull people together in small groups and begin talking about what we need to talk about.
An exchange of ideas.
Yes,
Yeah.
and it's sort of Gandhi-ish, like you start with one person rather than thinking you have to do it big, because sometimes big can be too costly and not effective. We thought, let's begin in my beautiful backyard mini farm, which you've been in, that many of the community know about, because I've been working with food, organic food, for now over 45 years. Let's bring a small group together who know Paul and Drew, who we can begin sharing thoughts and growing. So
About
I feel
what's
like
next.
tonight, I just wrote a note to them and said, how exciting to be connecting with you again about issues that people want to know about and we need to start talking about.
And if Driscoll's and other big entities had really meant it, if they farmed the way Paul and Drew did, then, oh my gosh, what a different world we'd be in. But instead of them changing the way they farmed, they changed organic and farmed in the way that would just be most profitable because they didn't have the values, they didn't have those principles that we started off with. Did you want to respond to that?
I would say, but maybe that will be the next change, because you said something last night about 95% of the trucks pulling up to grocery stores are not organic, right? Is that what you said?
I said 99% of the food gets bought in the grocery store, and the fact that the farmers that farm the way we farm are not getting access to that shelf space is the problem.
So if we can do what has already been done, even though the numbers are small, and I think organics are now 3 to 6%.
Yeah, it's
state.
even smaller.
Well,
I think.
Used to be even smaller back
Oh,
then.
in California, it's about 3%. I think Paul said last night.
Okay.
Yep.
If we can get the big guys to realize or to learn from all of you some of those values, to get to their hearts and their souls and not just money. Because while profit is important, I'm an entrepreneur. I hope as much as I can be, I'm a socially aware entrepreneur. I still make money. I have to pay people and to pay my bills.
Yep.
I am not a co-op. I understand co-ops, but I've chosen to do it this way. If we can get some of those companies to learn like they did about organics through all of you or through the public, asking questions, wanting something different, just like they did when 40 or so years ago, the stories the elders now tell you.
Yeah.
If somehow you all, with the support of the elders, can get a different understanding with the big companies, then change can happen.
Yeah.
I don't think we need to give up hope. And an even more important issue came up last night is we all know that people are still confused.
And we always say, if you're not confused, then you're not paying attention.
We think
So
that
there
labeling
should be confusion.
we think labeling will help, and honestly, here in California or or the West Coast, I guess, is CCOF. That took a long time for people to even recognize and trust that green label. Now that that is different, then maybe that's what the Real Organic Project will help with. But the labeling does help, something so they know they can look at it and trust it. Whole Foods started doing that. I think they have their different levels, their different colors. People look at that and they trust that maybe they'll even pay a little more, or the story behind it. So again, in a way, what this salon did last night was inspired me again to think, cool. These people are starting to stir some things up, or have been stirring something up. How do we bring more people into the fold to understand what organic growing of food, the treatment of people from beginning to end, from soil to the plate? How do we adjust again? Explanation, trust, and clarity.
Yeah,
That's what I felt last night.
That's what Paul said.
What do you think?
Bring it back. You know, because nothing's changed. It's what we've always meant. We just need to bring it back in a little bit now that there are so many new players, and say, is this what we meant? Is this working? Is this going to bring the change that we all know that our kind of farming, our kind of food and eating will bring to the world? And I think we've realized, no, it's not. That's not what's happening. And the farmers are struggling who are doing it this way. And so we need to come back together and say, let's redefine this, or let's put our feet in the sand and say, this is what we meant at the beginning. I want to go back a little bit more to those times, because, you know, sometimes I was just a baby in the 70s and wish that I could have grown up in that hippie culture, you know, but it sounds like it was tough. You know, you took some abuse. And what has gone for the good now? Like, I guess I can say, as a woman and in science and farming, I feel like I've had it pretty good. And so I guess some things have gotten better. Maybe talk a little bit about those early times and then some of the good things that have happened since then.
I think anytime something shifts, and remember, life is long and we're only capturing this little moment in time. When you read history books, you read about centuries and thousands of years, and we're in this little moment of debate, and our focus is on the land, the environment, the climate, people, and food. So I think back then what was going on was, it wasn't tough. It was misunderstood. It was, you know, here I was, I feel like a really fairly responsible businesswoman, doing things differently, but I had a regular restaurant. I was hiring people. I just was using ingredients that were not inexpensive. My first question was, can you give me a deal? Uh-huh. The first question was, how is it produced? Are you using Roundup, even though you're saying you're sustainable? This was the same with the wines. All our wines were organic back then. All our wines were local. People hated it because they were buying French wines. I mean, we were ridiculed, and we would go to wine tastings and we would ask those questions. How do you grow your grapes? And I remember being at one wine tasting with a group of my staff, and the head of the tasting came up to me and said, would you please call your staff off? They can't answer the questions. And I looked at him and I said, are you kidding me? You're growing grapes. It's the same thing. So what it was more was that nobody had started thinking that way.
You mean your staff was asking questions of the farmers that they couldn't answer?
Yeah, the winemakers.
Oh, the winemakers, yeah.
Yeah, the winemakers.
They hadn't asked the questions, so they didn't know the answers.
No.
Yeah.
Going to the grocery store, they talked last night about this, go and ask questions. I would go into a grocery store and I'd be very nice about it and say, could you tell me if there are any, pesticides or chemicals put on this? And they would look at me and say, I have no idea. I said, I'll come back next week. And if you could find out, that would be great.
Yeah.
Or at the farmer's market even. Before there were all the labeling and signs, we would just ask, what are you putting on the soil? And they said, oh, we're only using Roundup. And I said, okay. And they said, but that's okay.
Right, that's safe.
That's okay.
That's what they've told us.
Methylbromide dissipates, and Roundup's okay. And then it got to the answer was, oh, we're only putting Roundup around the outside. God bless Larry Jacobs for saying, you're putting Roundup is coming over to my organic soil, blah, blah, blah.
Oh, so, and what about the person applying the Roundup, right? Does that matter?
Yeah.
I can't believe that we don't talk about that more.
But so you asked about back then. I think it was beginning of asking questions about where the food came from. And there was a lot of, they poked fun at it, but we were encouraging people to do that more. And it was interesting. I wouldn't say it was hard. I actually found it really exciting. And I might have had a bit of, what's the word? I was pretty tenacious about those questions and had to be backed down sometimes, get off your soapbox for some of the things you're talking about. But when I look back, it was because I was surrounded by ethical people growing food. Remember, I was not with people looking for deals. I didn't care if they came in and said, I can give you this for cheaper, it doesn't matter. I'd say, well, are there any pesticides or chemicals on those potatoes? Because I had a breakfast place. And I had someone standing next to boxes of potatoes for hours chopping them. I didn't want them to be around something that might harm them.
And potatoes are the worst. So that was the right question for potatoes.
Strawberries.
They're bad too,
brassicas. I mean,
Yeah,
I learned from all of you.
Yeah.
And so it was just a very different way of looking at food and restaurant. And my costs were different.
Yeah, the margins are so thin in restaurants, I hear. And so that's, as a farmer trying to figure out how to sell your stuff to restaurants, that's what I hear the most, is that we're really struggling.
Like I've always, years, I've used a whole chicken. And when you use a whole chicken, that means they eat dark meat and light meat.
Right.
And that means that the dark meat is as valuable as the light meat, as the white meat.
Tastier, even.
Well, I think it's tastier. It's the best. Like, really? I'd pay more for that thigh. But to get the public to understand this was really a challenge, or the fact that they weren't going to get a massive amount of anything, but they were going to, we shifted the center of the plate. I learned this from an organization called Old Ways Preservation and Trust, who took us, chefs and cooks and journalists all over the world, to learn the way others ate. And what we found a lot was, except during celebration times when they would, sacrifice an animal and you just ate it for a long time, or if you happen to live in the midst of just grazing, you ate more meat. But most of them ate smaller amounts of protein on lots of plant-based. So our food was always less protein, more plant-based. I consulted at Stanford Hospital for 13 years. That was the biggest shift. Like, how do you trick people, fill up their plate with all this, I consider it actually to tastier food, with all this plant-based, clean, healthy food and smaller amounts of meat. So back then it was just adjusting the way we purchased. We had to learn how to do it, and we did learn how to do it. When the pandemic hit, we were just about to enter our 40th birthday, and I was trying to semi-regenerate. I don't call it retire, but after 40, I'm laughing, but I was trying to like ride my bike and do other things and travel and be with my kids.
Human.
And when the pandemic hit, it was like, bam, reinvent again. And with that, I do think many changes happened. I think there were silver linings. People bought more local food because they were staying home. Farmers got the price for their food that they deserve, because I don't know that many wealthy farmers. So suddenly they started.
Any?
Maybe the big guys. There are people who do. There are some people who have a good living who are good business people, but there aren't. I knew all that, so it was very exciting that CSA boxes they couldn't sell, they couldn't pack enough, and people were aware of local food. As the pandemic cleared up, and as a restaurant who has, if we're lucky, we make 5 cents on the dollar. We have a 5% if we're lucky. As we began to purchase food and the prices had gone up, my amazing chef, Brian Turk, said to me, I'm having a really hard time here. Oh my God, Jesse, the prices of organic ingredient and especially proteins are skyrocketing, but skyrocketing more for the people we're buying from, because you all are trying to take care of people too. Right. We're all trying to take care of people and doing the right thing.
Yeah, the laws, maybe explain that a little bit if you know that. So the laws for workers now are you can't work more than 40 hours without overtime, and minimum wage is now at least 15 in the fields, which is so right. But what's been happening is, because of that, all the production's shifting to Mexico, where there are no laws to protect the workers there. And so, great, it can be certified organic. We're shifting all of our production, or not our production, but our purchasing. And the farms here that are doing the right thing locally are going out of business because of that. So maybe talk a little bit about what eaters can do to kind of, and restaurants, and I think to educate their eaters about these issues.
I think it's another transition time of the value of food, but it's always been an issue when
Yeah.
you use the right ingredient. And I'm not talking about gourmet shipped from other parts of the world in jars with, expensive olive oil from what I'm talking about, the real definition of gourmet, which is organic, well-produced food that takes care of the environment and treats people well.
Yeah.
So I think what's happening for us now, and actually I had a conversation last night at the salon about this with Dave, that I think the shift is in our storytelling, because we've always been, restaurants tell the story, we can. We are very important for farms because we can get people to eat kohlrabi. If we make it taste delicious and it's on a lot of our menus, we can make an unsexy ingredient or a philosophy trendy
Yeah.
because we put it on a lot of plates and we make it taste delicious, and they start understanding it.
Like
So-
kale, or give an example of something that has kind
Beets.
Oh, okay.
I'm going to give you some crazy ones. Way back when, people would not eat beets, and I would say, close your eyes. You're not going to get the canned beet. Just close your eyes and taste this. And now beets, of course.
good.
I know. Kale. I remember frisee, different kinds of lettuces. People would put them to the side of the plate because it wasn't iceberg or maybe romaine.
Yeah.
It was that simple back then. Or blue potatoes. They just didn't know what to do with different colored potatoes, or different sized fruits and veggies. We would put them all over the restaurant. The crazier they were, the better. So that they started getting used to not a wedge of tomato on a salad. So it was size, appearance, taste being different that were really fun. It was so much fun to turn people on. So when we talked about this last night, because we are storytellers, that's what we need to do. We took pride in that at Flea Street and in all my restaurants. Now it's more about how do we get people back to even want to work with us, period. On the farm or in the restaurants. Cooking schools are closing. San Francisco cooking school closed because young people who wanted to become chefs, they don't have the aspiration of becoming a rock star anymore, or when they get out of school and get into what it really takes and how much it really pays, they don't want to do it. So for me, first it is being good to the people from beginning to end, and charging what I have to, and to pay those people from, as I said, soil to the plate. And that is the story. Honestly, the story is to stand at a table and say, we might be a little more expensive, but we want you to trust that our food is still completely clean, and that we are doing our best to make a good living for the people who are taking care of growing the food, fishing the food, ranching the food, and you.
It is complicated. So it's not just about clean food too. It's about everything that's in the food, all this nutrition. The reason why it tastes so good is because there's so much more nutrition in there. And so there's quite an education, or even explaining last night to people that might not understand the connection between farming and sequestering carbon that Drew was talking about. There's so much to tell. So how do we even
can't
begin?
do it. So I'm just letting you know.
Don't try.
We in the restaurant can't do it.
Yeah.
We are, you hear about shortages in all service industry, grocery stores, farming. God, I heard one this morning that was just like, oh my God, I don't remember what it was, but we hear about it everywhere. The service, people don't want to work for service. All I know was somebody was trying to get a repair person, and they couldn't because there weren't any. And she said, well, where are they? There's unemployment. I mean, there are jobs up, signs up everywhere. What are the people doing? None of us know yet. We're still in an unknown time. But for me and my business, still connected as we are, with an amazing staff who knows at their core, because family meals includes, we don't go out and buy cheap food for them to eat. They eat the same as they're serving to others, because they feel that, and we can tell some stories, or we're being a farmer in. We can barely get them to the farm because we can barely get them to come to work. Right now, we're just trying to make sure that the people who are willing to come back to work have a sense of safety, of deliciousness, of integrity. And then we begin telling some of those stories like, wow, it is actually better for you. Oh, we don't use as much salt, fat, or sugars. Brian mentioned last night, ingredients first. We make sure they taste the food. And then we can talk more of it. It's so complex. There's so many layers. And we, in a restaurant, don't want to ruin someone's meal either. Because if we preach to them,
True.
and we make them uncomfortable. It's like, oh,
Yeah.
and sometimes afterwards I say, oh, actually, just enjoy your meal, because I'll start going at them. Excuse me, I'll start, telling some of the stories that you do.
Right.
I think it's more take care of the people so there's happiness, so there's hospitality, so there's kindness, so there's delicious beauty. It's simple. And then as we build there again, then we can start telling little stories.
Yeah, I think they have to be small
They
snippets
have
at a
to be
time.
so-
Yeah.
At the top of our menu, we thank our partners and friends. We list every single farm. And at the bottom, we thank we don't call them back of the house or front of the house. We are now heart of the house. They all work together and share. We thank every single person from the dishwasher. So that's the beginning of respect. And then at the table, we may give them something to talk about. Oh, the flavor's different in your mashed potatoes because the potatoes been grown right, and it's healthier because it has nutrients. We can do a little bit of that, but not a lot.
Yeah.
They don't want to hear it.
Yeah.
They're out to dinner, drinking and eating.
I think that love can be felt too when you eat someone's food that has been sourced so carefully and then prepared, and it's this gift. I think it sends someone out into the world after experiencing that, wanting to pay it forward, wanting to pass it on. So I hope that resonates, that you've touched a lot of meals, which means a lot of lives and a lot of, hopefully, a kind of network, a web of kindness.
That's why we do it.
Yeah.
And this community was so good to me and Flea Street during the pandemic. They came to the door with checks for thousands of dollars so we wouldn't go away.
Wow.
We did a nonprofit that sent 29,000 meals to the hospitals, and they were all organic.
Wow.
Everything. And they were
Of
wrapped
course,
with
people
little
in
heart
hospitals.
stickers. And I mean, we did these 29,000 meals, and we employed people. But the community gave us money so we could keep our staff employed, so we could still buy local organic. We didn't skimp. And so we could send out these bags of love. So I am so grateful to this community for supporting us. And I always ask their forgiveness for every bad meal that they might have gotten, because being in our industry, it happens.
Yeah.
But for supporting the connections that we're talking about today of why we still do what we do, why we still are concerned and respectful. Again, I would say of people from beginning to end, because that's really what it's about. And that they, on a very deep level, like last night, said that we, after over 45 years, they know exactly what we do, that we are still doing this. They are so happy. And I think they're grateful to see that there are some new connections happening.
So you mentioned in that story, though, getting food
getting
to hospitals. And I want to touch on this idea that good food is elitist. And of course, sick people should be having food that heals them, doesn't make them more sick. That is not elitist. And taking care of your workers and people. And so what do we do about the fact that it is more expensive to produce food this way? And that accusation that what we do, therefore, inevitably becomes elitist because it's just a more expensive, because you're treating everybody right? When it's cheap, somebody's getting taken advantage of. So
when Simply Organic first came out, the first question when I was interviewed was, what do you do about the people who are living, on marginal means? Organic is elitist. What do you do with that? And my answer to them was, you're asking the wrong question. That's not what it's about. Because how can we possibly think that every human being and their children, families and children, do not have the right to eat clean fuel that really nourishes our body? And the primary answer I would say to that is we have got to pay for food, and those who can afford it should, and those who can afford it should support those who can't. That's my answer, really, not that it's elitist. It has become elitist because the Western world, we all know that there's this notion of big and cheap is good, a bargain. People still say it. Even people of means will say, oh, I got a deal. And I just think, I want to roll my eyeballs. And I remember being at the farmer's market and somebody dickering over like the price of fennel. I remember I turned to them, I said, don't you ever bargain with a farmer. That's not where you should be bargaining. And she said, why? I said, because they're still growing our food in the right way. This is not, go to Macy's and bargain, but don't do it here. Remember I told you, sometimes you have to tone down a bit. But I think that we're still stuck in the value of big and cheap. Back to the old world. Let's backtrack maybe 50 to 75 years, which is a bit of time in history. And let's go to other parts of the world where I've been, and I hope you have and others have, where they respect the people who bake the bread. They hold them in esteem. They respect, when they go to the farmer's market, the people who are growing these delicious tomatoes, and they buy them, and they're not just looking for cheap. And these people have a lifestyle, and they work in a community, and they wouldn't cheat on each other. They wouldn't hurt each other. We have no clue what that means in this country.
Yeah.
We are willing to do anything to get big and cheap. It's terrible. So I guess my answer to that is we're still upside down. We've righted a little bit from when I started going to EcoFarm and met my beloved heroes, the farmers, who truly taught me everything about food and flavor and even sometimes cooking, because I would ask the farmer, what do you do with it? And they'd say, nothing, we're too busy, we steam. And I thought, oh, it tastes that good. I think that we're going to have to slowly flip it again, or try to flip the value system and keep telling the stories that you talk about why people are growing the food they do, and how you meet very few wealthy farmers, very few wealthy restaurateurs, they're a handful. And that there's a reason you pay more, and that maybe you should eat less, and maybe you should make a chicken last all week, and maybe going to a grocery store where they might be throwing so much food away, because waste is another issue we're not even talking about. We compost from the restaurant, we bring it here to the garden. So we actually have better food costs because we don't waste. And in the world, most of the world, they don't waste. We are a bit disgraceful when it comes to food. We are embarrassing.
Yeah, there's so
I'm
much
so
connected.
sorry to say that to you as a young farmer, but you can't stop doing what you're doing, though. We can't stop doing what we're doing because we are a moment in time. We have to keep believing that we can change the system, and that we can, even though we're not making as much money, we have more valuable lives, we have more meaningful lives. We're passing along something that is more meaningful to the people who work around us in our communities. We don't have much choice unless we stop doing it.
Right, right. When cost is kind of the only thing people are looking at, somehow they think if it's more, then I'm just getting taken advantage of. And instead of saying, okay, I'm paying more because I actually know that this person is authentic and I know who they are and they are taking care of the people around them and keep feeding me nutritious food. So it's just reframing the story, I think, and valuing different things.
Again, silver linings to the pandemic. I think we still don't know the values that are going to rise up. And one of the values rising up in my restaurant, Flea Street, is that we charge a 20% service charge for everything, even to go. And 100% of that goes to the staff. I pay taxes on it. And what that is doing is building a different value. And the community then they talk about the fact that Flea Street values its workforce. We always have, so number one, they're beginning to realize that there are people who are doing this. And then to create the connection of the fact that we respect and are willing to pay our vendors, our growers and ranchers and fisher people, a fair wage, and they still don't make enough, all the way at the beginning is to begin to talk about that as a model and turn that value system upside down, rather than just what we've been doing, which is I don't know how to say it, but the romance of it. We live in the romance of it, and maybe in the midst of talking about paying to people, you can give someone a bite of that tomato or have them smell it.
It's different.
Do something, but somehow, in order for them to pay, they have to realize there's a reason why they're paying for it.
Yeah. We also talked last night about how that used to be organic, everything we're talking about, and now we need another lane, another differentiation. And I'm sure there's a lot of confusion, right? We said if you're in the marketplace and you're not confused, you're not paying attention. There are a lot of labels out there, and it seems like every time our movement or several movements define themselves, it gets quickly co-opted. So I always try to tell people, well, look behind the label. Who are the people? Is it a brand that's bringing you this movement, or is it a group of farmers in our case? Or, can you trust who is bringing you this label? And maybe that's the way you can navigate through all the confusion. Do you have any advice for eaters when they're trying to figure all this out? And is too many labels a bad thing, or is this just inevitable, unfortunately?
I think understanding, unfortunately, kind of distills down to the People magazine concept. People need very quick either visuals, like pictures, or something. They don't read a lot unless they're reading a book or a newspaper. And we found that we turn them off. We have to figure out the quickest way to get the most important message to them. And like the whole bullet point, you can get maybe, if you've got 20 different thoughts, you've got to distill it down to 3. And then if you've got their attention, maybe go to 4 or 5. So I think what we're considering now, and we're looking at the same thing you are, how do we get people to understand why we pay more for food and then they have to pay more? Because we keep talking about the dollar. And I remember at the beginning of the organic movement, it was like, okay, I'm going to put $1 on the table. You tell me how much of that is going to actually go to the people. And everybody would just sit there. Because it would get down to 5 cents. It was all gone. And I think now, if we can possibly get justice for paying people for taking care of the right kind of food, if we can begin elevating that all the way from people who are impoverished, that if somehow we can help those people to get the right kind of food, it cannot be elitist. You're right. Other parts of the world, they don't do this to people who don't have enough money. I was just in Norway, and I felt like I took a big sigh of deep breath, because the government is a socialist democratic government. They take care of people in all ways. They tax people highly, but the taxes go to taking care of the people. And the wealthy do things to take care of the people. It's so refreshing. And if you don't have much money, then others make sure you get fed, or the people in your family who are older in a really respectful place, or everybody gets health care. So it's the same with eating and food. Those who don't have, we can't use this excuse anymore. And if you're asking for solutions, I think what we did last night, that we begin talking about it again. There's no other way but one-to-one. And go in for the consumer, you ask the question, what should the consumer do to change things or to learn? Go into your grocery store and ask them. Go to a farmer's market. Ask the farmer, well, tell me, how do you grow the food? They will answer you. Don't just look at the label. 40-some years ago, we didn't always buy from CCOF farmers. I taught my staff to go and look in people's eyes, and if you feel like they're lying, just walk away. If you ask them, if you say to them, can you just explain to me what organic means to you? And they say, oh, it's sustainable, we use Roundup. I would say thank them and walk away. That's all. and go to the next booth. So I think beginning to know what you want in your food system and how you want to treat people, and begin asking some questions again.
I like that. Don't worry, we use Roundup. It's safe. The latest one now is it's not organic, but it's non-GMO, and that's a little bit incredibly deceptive, because most things that we eat aren't GMO, right? That's for grains for confinement cattle. So they'll say that as if, oh, phew, now you can be relieved, but it's coated in pesticides, the non-GMO stuff. So I think we have to get smarter, right?
I think people are this is a hard time anyway, because there's a lot of chaos and confusion, and we've been through a lot of sadness. We've been through a lot of isolation. We've had a government that has been, not really kind or supportive or led us in directions of clarity. So there's a lot stirring in people anyway, but food is a perfect medium to become clear again, because as an organic farmer, it's not that complicated. It's really not. You make good soil. The pests don't come at the crops as much because they're stronger plants, am I correct? Same with animals. If you feed them what they're supposed to eat, or if they're swimming in clean water and not tanks, if you treat the fuel that keeps us healthy respectfully, then it's also delicious. And so somehow we've got to get it down to a smaller place for people to understand the questions. Even you are talking about complexities of GMOs. People would be like, oh my God, you're giving me another one? I have to worry about that too?
Right.
So maybe when we have these salons, when we begin talking again to each other, I think a question I asked last night was, give me something to go out and do. Just give me something to go do.
Yeah.
Or give me something to begin saying.
And I think
a nugget.
Farmers are trusted right now. So
yeah, you are, finally.
And so are chefs. And I think that is wonderful, and it comes with a responsibility then that we do need to speak out. Honestly, I think all the farmers would rather just stay on their farms and grow food. That's why we did this. But there is a responsibility, because we can see that our movement isn't growing like it should. And so now this burden kind of comes on us to raise awareness, because people do care. They do want to see what we do replicate everywhere. I think that is everyone's vision for a healthier future. So because we're not getting there, I think, and we can see it early, we can see it before, because we see our friends aren't making it, we see we're struggling. So we now have this burden, this responsibility to ensure that this survives.
I'm wondering if there's a way that we could all decide there are some really simple speaking points that we're all saying the same thing.
Yeah, yeah.
So that something begins resonating, that, oh, they're hearing it. It's like branding. Oh my goodness, they're seeing the same thing over and over again. Example, during the pandemic, I was sending out newsletters, and we have about 11,000 people on our newsletters, and we get a 45 to 50% open rate, because we always kind of send a similar message. And it's usually twisted, ethical, something that they know that we're talking about, and food. But one time someone asked me to do 10 things I was grateful for, and I had 30 seconds. But that message maybe is what we need to do. Like, let's think of 10 things that all of us begin saying over and over again about farming.
Can we do that many? Food. Or is that too many?
Well, start with 3 or 4, and get your friends and people to say the same thing, or chefs to say in the restaurant, the reason you're paying for this food is because we're paying people and farmers. I mean, that's simple. Or isn't that delicious? It's because we're willing to pay the farmer more. Just some really tiny nuggets.
Respect.
Yes, respect first.
Yeah.
So then once they get that, then they think they're connected back to where their food comes from.
Yeah.
Because there's so much right now.
We better brainstorm and make sure. We started with soil-grown, pasture-raised, farmer-led as 3 of those 10 things, but I think we should expand. We should make a list and then get feedback on all of them, and then say these 3 resonate. Let's start with those.
But wait, maybe it's done already. Maybe what you just said. Give me were there 3 or 4?
Soil-grown, pasture-raised, farmer-led.
Great, that's 3. If I had that to train my staff, those 3. If we talked about that last night at the meeting, if someone in Vermont used the same 3 words, if someone in Colorado, someone in Southern California, someone in Canada, we just started with those 3 concepts. And then we gave them a little bit of background, maybe 2 more. Yeah. You've started a real movement. Yeah. And it may not be about your label or branding. It may not be about EcoFarm. It may not be about, I don't know what Moses is. It may not be about, but you're beginning.
It's the Midwest EcoFarm.
Whatever. But you're beginning to connect people back to you, I think.
It's not starting a new movement. It's reigniting one that's been here all along. It just need a little kick. And Paul Muller, he would probably add beauty. He said, I don't know how to describe everything that we do, but if I had to put one word to it, it's beauty. And you can see that in his farm. And the way that they treat everybody that they work with and the relationships they have, that's beautiful. And I like that too. So maybe we need to end with that. No matter what list we have, it's beauty that we're trying to magnify.
But I have one more, because throughout my history of joining with the farmers, often the cooks are forgotten at the table. They're being invited again. I know you have a few cooks on your team. You've got Alice. Who else do you have?
Dan Barber is
Dan
one.
Barber, great. So I hope to be one of them too, because
absolutely, you're here.
Because with all of it, we have to remember that the sensuality, that the aroma, the taste, the beauty. I mean, I can hear food crackling or popping in a fire or whatever. The sensuality or the deliciousness has got to be there, because as much as you may not want to believe it, I actually think that's the first word with food. If they taste it, or it drips on their mouth, or they smell it, or they look at it, they remember. And then if you put the ethics with it, often putting the ethics of where it comes from and how it's grown first, it's important, but that's a hearty, heavy, not as much fun.
Yeah.
That sensuality food entices them in.
Yeah. It makes life worth living, right?
I'm going to go back to mashed potatoes. You sit at a table.
I love that saying.
And the mashed potatoes are delicious. And somebody looks up and says, wow, what did you do? And my answer is, not a lot, and I'm still going to charge you. But it's a really well-grown variety of potato. I put a little organic butter and a tiny bit of cream. Not much. What you're really tasting is a potato that somebody took the time to grow well. What's happened is, with a lot of the European cuisines making things very complicated, that it became complicated. I think this style of cooking is so simple that we miss it. I taught a class for 13 years at Stanford. 1 page, 1 pot, 7 ingredients, no recipes. They went to the garden any time of the year. They brought it into the kitchen. We made something raw and cooked, and we used olive oil, which is fat. It could be butter or, any kind of fat. Olive oil, vinegar, salt, pepper, sugar, herbs, and spices. Those 7 things were in front of them. Some fresh herbs, some fresh spices. The olive oil represented fat. The vinegar represented acid. Sugar, salt, and sugar and pepper are ingredients that are both imperative for cooking, but also make people sick, because you have too much salt and too much sugar. So we were teaching good health, but we were teaching a little bit of adjustment. But they would just take this food, and with those ingredients, make food. Piece of chicken, a potato with a little bit of olive oil, salt, pepper, and herbs, peppers harvested, greens, they'd make a vinaigrette. But they started realizing this is so simple, but it came from they tasted the ingredient first. They tasted whatever came out of the garden, whatever they got from the farmer's market. So in a way, what seems complex to you, I actually learned from farmers.
It's teaching them to use their senses. It's
Yes.
making them, it's so attainable. Like, you can do this. I'm not going to hand you the recipe or the skills. You can do this. It's empowering.
Yeah, I mean, I follow recipes. We all follow recipes. I mean, I wrote cookbooks, so I want you to follow recipes, and
Yeah.
you want to buy the books. But real cooking, to teach someone and not be afraid anymore, or if you go to other parts of the world, they'll harvest something, they'll bring it in, they'll smell it. Often you think, oh my God, this was so delicious, and they just put a little olive oil and salt on it, or they just sprinkled a little sugar or herbs, and you think, wow, because the ingredient was good. So you as growers taught me that.
I think
Paul and Drew taught me that.
when we lose that good ingredient too, I think what ends up happening is we're just so unhealthy. I think of my daughter. I've raised a child, and she brings friends over, and my daughter's favorite vegetable is kale. And they have never had good vegetables or fruit. I mean, they taste horrible. And so the end result of that is they eat processed crap, and it's just such a crime that what we are eating now, because the fruit and vegetables taste so bad, is just so unhealthy, and all the costs affiliated with that. I think we just have a responsibility to grow fruits and vegetables that taste good, right?
Yes,
It's not so revolutionary.
So I'm going to come back with the cup half full again, because we can always think about the cup half empty, about people who aren't eating it. And, kids don't know that a chicken doesn't come from a plastic container, or that potatoes have leaves. I mean, they don't know all this, but little by little, people are going to more farmers markets. Last night, Paul said when I first met him at the farmers market in the 80s, there were 5 in this area. Now there are 200. So the cup half full is people are honoring you.
Yes.
Farmers used to be not treated very well and not respected.
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier, farmers are finally being respected.
Yeah.
So there is change. And I guess I want you to hold on to that, and all the farmers and cooks to hold on to the positive part, the part that will keep us motivated. Because we can always go into how it's not right, not fair, not there yet, not good enough, or not being paid, because that exists. But if we can hold on to what your work is doing, how you as farmers and growers are teaching the cooks, and how there are more, look how many restaurants call themselves farm to table.
Yeah.
Whether they're valid or not is another issue, but
We know it's a value.
who would have ever thought of that term? When I started in the 70s, even in the 80s, it didn't exist. It just started about 15 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah.
So to keep building on some of that, the fact that people are paying attention, and even with what you're doing with the Real Organic Project, is those words, Real Organic Project. You're trying to say, okay, there's something else to look at here. Hasn't really changed, but we have some more information that's not really different, but the world has changed the way they're handling it, but we're just going to kind of bring you back to the simple. And we're going to help you understand, and I hope that invigorates you, because it invigorates me. It gives me hope. It gives me more reason to do the work I do in the restaurant. It gives me greater connection and more and a different narrative for my storytelling about food. And especially now that justice has entered that, and fair wage, that's a very important new part of what we have to share, so people understand why they pay more for their food. We absolutely have to be explaining to them that if we don't do this, it will all be grown in another country where we can't trust it, or it will all come from big farms, or it will be not real food anymore. I mean, some of these new meat products are not real food. And the kids turning vegetarian are in opposition to the production of animals for the right reason, but not for the truth. The truth is animals belong on farms. Those of us who eat meat want it grown right. It's okay.
When done well, yeah.
Yes, so that all that you're doing, that cup being half full and sharing it is what I am re-inspired again, and was last night by being with all of you. And I'm very grateful.
Thank you so much. That's such a wonderful place to end. Thank you, Jessie.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Real Organic Podcast. We hope that you will subscribe, tell your friends, and leave us a rating and review. A video version of this interview can be found at realorganicproject.org/episode 81. Please join us next time when we'll hear from Jack Algier, the farm director at Stone Barn Center for Food and Agriculture in New York's Hudson Valley. To support this podcast and our certified farms, become a recurring donor at realorganicproject.org and get the benefits of being a real friend, including our book club, where you can ask many of our favorite authors your questions. Dan Barber is our next book club guest, so we'll see you there.